Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 4th of August of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. But before we start, I would like to remind you that it's already 2 months past since the beginning of the Ukrainian greatest counteroffensive operation, what the Ukrainians managed to achieve as a result of those 61 days. To tell the truth, they haven't managed to achieve much. Just a few local successful operations, nothing more. For example, the Ukrainians, since the beginning of their greatest counteroffensive operation, managed probably finally to damage the Russian ship in the vicinity of Russian coast of Russian port town Novorossiysk. Yes, today in the previous media I told you that the ship was destroyed, and of course the ship wasn't destroyed, the ship was damaged. But the thing is that according to my information, according to my understanding, information I have, the Russians don't have a port that can take this ship and repair. So basically this ship, the Ukrainians are no longer able to use the ship, at least until the end of the special military operation, or the process of repairing of this ship will take too much time, because there are basically no infrastructure to repair this ship. So this is the situation. The ship wasn't destroyed, but the ship are no longer available for the Russian forces. What else the Ukrainians managed to achieve? Probably they managed to destroy Crimea Bridge. Yes, that was a very successful operation. We can't we can't understand, we don't know, and we can't measure the results, the value of that attack, because from one side we understand that the bridge was destroyed and the Russians don't have possibility to use the bridge for light cars, but the railways bridge still exists and the Russians don't have problems to supply and support Crimea with everything they need. What else the Ukrainians managed to achieve? Yes, for some reason we can say that the Ukrainians also destroyed another bridge that connects Crimea with the mainland in Zaporozhye. This is also a very important bridge, and probably the Ukrainians managed to reduce the Russian possibilities to support their forces on the south of Bradley Square. Probably the Ukrainians managed to achieve some success in Crimea. They managed to discover and understand Russian situation with air defense forces. If you remember, during the previous 2 months, the Ukrainians managed to destroy at least 3 or 4 very big ammo depots and so on. But we can't measure and we can't understand, because the consequences of those attacks, successful attacks, we will see maybe in a month, or if we will ever see this, because maybe everything is okay with the Russians, with their supports, and they will replace the lost munitions very easily. Very difficult to understand. What else the Ukrainians managed to achieve? The Ukrainians, it's like achievement with the minus before achievement, is that they lost the last port in this area. And from now on, the Ukrainians don't have possibilities to receive a weapon using the sea. Now they can use just railways and tracks and roads, and of course it's too expensive and it's too unlogical. When talking about Kherson area, yes, the Ukrainians managed to achieve something during the process. During the flooding situation, the Ukrainians managed to cross Dnipro River, and they were the first one, and they captured the area in the vicinity of Antonov Bridge, and that's it. This is the only progress the Ukrainians managed to achieve since the beginning of the greatest counteroffensive operation. By the way, for example, today the Ministry of Defense reported that as a result of fierce artillery duels and clashes, the Ukrainians lost another 25 soldiers and 2 armored vehicles. This is the price for controlling the islands between the banks of Dnipro River. Every day's losses from the Ukrainian side. The question is it worth it? I believe we don't have the answer to this question, and probably our grandchild will be able to give us the answer to this question after many years later, after the end of the special military operation. When talking about Zaporozhye, if you ask my opinion, I think that Ukrainians haven't managed even a single success in this area. They haven't achieved nothing. They managed to capture a few settlements in the gray zone like Lapkov and Petykhatki. They lost a lot of soldiers, a lot of very experienced, well-trained forces and soldiers from 128th Mountain Assault Brigade, which probably even stopped existing or something like this because of fierce fightings and heaviest losses from the Ukrainian side. The Ukrainians lost significant number of armored vehicles and tanks and people and personnel in the vicinity of Robotyne. And for example, today the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, Shoigu, this is the guy who is currently located on the Kupiansk front line. This Shoigu, he reported that the Ukrainians, since the beginning of their greatest counter-offensive operation from the 4th of June, lost 43,000 soldiers. 43,000 soldiers just for 2 months of clashes. According to information we have, the Wagners, since the beginning of the storming of Artyomovsk, lost just 25,000 soldiers killed. The Ukrainians lost 43. Furthermore, the Minister of Defense added that this number doesn't include the losses of Ukrainian forces in the hospitals, just the losses on the ground. And nobody knows the real losses of the Ukrainians in the hospitals, or who of them were able to return back, who died in hospitals or something like this. Also, the Ukrainians lost 4,900 of different types of vehicles, and not just vehicles, just equipment. 26 airplanes, 9 helicopters, 1,800 tanks, 25 Leopards, 7 French AMX tanks, and more than 20 Bradleys. So significant losses of the Ukrainian forces without almost nothing, without any progress in this area. The Russians reported, for example, today that as a result of fierce clashes in the vicinity of Robotyne, the Ukrainians lost another 130 soldiers, 7 armored vehicles, and 1 artillery system. As you can see, the level of losses among armored vehicles has been reduced, but the level of losses of infantry is still on a very high level, because the Ukrainians continue attacking the Russian positions using just infantry because of lack of armored vehicles and because of very big need to save armored vehicles before possible next waves of offensive operation. For example, the Russians today published another video how another Ukrainian wave was heading from Novodanilovka in direction of Robotyne. The Russians managed to discover the movements of the Ukrainian forces, and using just the regular anti-tank missile, the Russians launched that missile in direction of armored vehicle, and in a few seconds that armored vehicle, probably with the personnel inside of that armored vehicle, was destroyed. So just the losses in a very simple situation. Furthermore, the Russians published more videos from Novodanilovka. On this video we see how the Russians discovered the accumulation of Ukrainian forces in that settlement, and after that they start bombing and shelling the Ukrainians. You know that maybe one of the most important success that Ukrainians managed to achieve during this counter-offensive operation, and probably this is the most important, but not the achievement on the ground or something like this, probably the Ukrainians realized. Probably and finally, most of the Ukrainians realized the situation they appear in. Not just the situation, a very difficult and terrible situation they appeared in. They are under the pressure of two big powers, the Western countries in the head of the United States of America and Russian Federation. Because a lot of people from Ukrainian authorities are their hands in blood. And currently they realize that from one side they need to stop this war, but from another side they can't stop this war because the soldiers and the relatives of those soldiers who were sent to this suicide operation after the war ends will go back to Kiev and will ask questions to them. And I believe that they're not ready to give answers. They have the answers, of course, but they're not ready to give these answers because basically they will be tortured and killed by these people. The situation is very critical. One more time, the Minister of Defense reported about the losses in 43,000 soldiers in this area. And if you know, and you can find the link under the description to this video, the Google document where I'm trying to make my own raw calculations of the Ukrainian losses. I based my calculation just on the Minister of Defense report. But even according to those raw calculations, the Ukrainians have already lost more than 200,000 soldiers. 200,000 soldiers, men, brothers, fathers were killed during the special military operation without any success, without any result. The Ukrainians are still in the same point without any movement, and furthermore we see that the Russians are getting stronger and stronger. And this is very important. The Ukrainians haven't changed their position. They're losing almost every single day. They think that they're going to win, but the Russians, since the beginning of the 2022, have improved their position, not just in military sphere, in science and so on. For example, as you know, today the World Bank have published the information about the strongest economies in the world. And the thing is that the Russian economy has the 5th position. The first position is China, the second is United States of America, the third one is India, the fourth one is Japan, and the 5th one is Russian Federation. The Russian Federation economy is stronger than Germany's one. The Russians is under very strong sanctions, but their economy is 5th in the world. And the Russians had lower positions during the previous years. So the Russians became stronger, and they're going to become even more. And I believe that probably, as you can see, the distance between Japanese economy and Russian economy is very low. And there is a very high chances that probably the next year the Russians are going to become the 4th economy in the world, the 4th one. What the Ukrainians are planning to do with the 4th economy in the world, with the 2nd army in the world, I don't know what they're going to do with this. But probably they know what they're doing, so we'll see. We'll see what is going to be next. Now we're moving to the Vremyivka tactical bridgehead. There are also very fierce clashes in this area. The Russians have activated their counter-artillery duels. Probably they managed to bring some artillery systems to the combat line. And today they published a lot of videos how their artillery was working, how their artillery systems were destroying the Ukrainian positions, Ukrainian reinforcements all over the combat line. This video we got from Zolotaya Niva. The Russians managed to discover the Ukrainian positions in that settlement, and after a very accurate attack, that positions was destroyed, and probably the Ukraine lost another operational ammo depot. On this video we see how the Russian artillery system was bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions somewhere between Velika Novoselovka and Shakhterskaya. We see that there's forest lines. This video is geolocated. There were trenches of Ukrainian forces. The drone was above the trenches, and the drone provided and corrected the Russian artillery system during the fire. Perfect tactic to destroy another checkpoint, another ammo depot. And another Russian video. On this video we see how the Russians discover another Ukrainian position, and as a result of accurate strike, the Ukraine lost probably another artillery system or local ammo depot. The Ukrainians from their side are trying to suppress and to attack the Russian positions in the small settlement like Stara Mlynovka. On this video we see how the Ukrainians managed to discover the Russian radar that the Russians were using for connections between the forces. Of course, this currently connection and radio signal is one of the most important part of any special operation, any war, any combat on any combat line, and to lose connection means probably sometimes to lose the battle. And another HIMARS usage against the Russian artillery warehouse. The Ukrainians drone managed to discover the Russian ammo depot somewhere inside the forest of Grad system. There was a lot of missiles, and after Ukrainians discovered that ammo depot, they launched the HIMARS missile, and as a result of that attack, the Russians lost probably a very important ammo depot that was located behind the main combat line that the Russians were using to supply and support their artillery forces. And this is a very big loss for the Russian artillery systems and Russian artillery forces in this area, obviously. So what the Ukrainians are trying to do? The Ukrainians are trying to attack to the south, and they're trying to attack Urozhaina, but yet they haven't managed to achieve any success in those operations. One more time, they're attacking in direction of Staromayorska or trying to counterattack and in direction of Urozhaina. Very interesting update we got from the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation. The Russians reported that the Russians during the previous 24 hours made few counter-offensive operations in this area, and currently the Russians is the side who counterattacks in the area of Staromayorska, and the Ukrainians are forced to step back. Also, the Russians report that as a result of these clashes in this area, the Ukrainians lost another 120 soldiers and 5 armored vehicles. So, without taking Urozhaina, there is no sense to move further to the south in Zavitna Bazhanya and Stara Mlynovka without taking the settlement, but yet the Ukrainians haven't managed to do this. Now we're moving to Donetsk front line. We haven't received nothing from this area. There is an operational pause in the vicinity of Avdiivka continues. It reminds me the silence before storm, because the more the parties have time to to regroup and fulfill their warehouses, the more powerful attack we're going to see after the end of this process. Very interesting video we got from Drone Forces, from Drone Squad. Sudoplatov, he published us a lot of videos about the situation on the ground. So basically on the screen you can see a small warehouse of probably one squad or one platoon of drone forces. Significant number, hundreds or even thousands of drones that, and this is the warehouse of Russian forces. I believe that these drones is enough for probably for 2 or 3 weeks of active clashes, because a lot of drones are shut down. They can be broken or something like this. So we see that the Russians also do have a lot of drones, and they're also trying to develop this doctrine. Now we're moving to Klishevka, to Bakhmut, Artyomovsk, New York agglomeration, Gorlovka. Today, for the first time, probably since the beginning of this year, we got at least a few videos from New York agglomeration, from in the vicinity of Gorlovka. The Ukrainians published the video how they discovered the Russian position somewhere on the hill, and after that the trenches on the hill, and after that the Ukrainians attacked that position with drone. And another video we got from the south, from Novoselovska. The same situation, the Ukrainians discovered Russian positions and then they attacked those positions with the drone. One more time, I can't tell you the level of damage that this drone can deal to Russian forces, and maybe all this tactic doctrine doesn't worth the money and time the Ukrainians spend to develop this type of warfare. When talking about Bakhmut and Artyomovsk, we haven't received many updates from this area. The Russians published the video how they were bombing and shelling the Ukrainians, but we will not follow this video because of violence and dead bodies. But basically this video shown us the situation in the vicinity of this forest. We will update this map because according to that video this area is no longer under Russian control and is under Ukrainian control. When talking about Klishevka itself, we haven't received any updates about any attempt from the Ukrainian side to attack this area. The only thing we have, probably that, as we discussed in the previous videos, the Western Sources map, deployment map, has been updated, and currently the Ukrainians have redeployed few battalions in this area, 214th Assault Battalion of 4 and Kraken as well. So let's say the Russians would say that the most nationalist battalions currently are located in Klishevka. Probably the Ukrainian military authority thinks that the more battalion is nationalized, the more it's and then this battalion is more motivated. I don't know. But yet the Ukrainians haven't managed to achieve any result in this area. Furthermore, we have just few updates from the vicinity of Artyomovsk about more drone attacks from the Ukrainian side. On this video we see how the Ukrainians managed to discover another track on this interception of road, and as a result of attack that track was damaged. And this is not the first video from this area, and since the end of July, this is the second video from the same interception of road. So we see that Ukrainians do have possibility to control, and they do have possibility to attack the same place as from day to day. And another video we got from the northern part of Artyomovsk, the 77th Air Mobile Brigade published the video how they managed to discover the Russian position, a Russian ammo depot in the northern part of Artyomovsk, and after artillery strike they managed to destroy and set on fire this entire building. So no progress, the Ukrainians continue regrouping. The Ministry of Defense reported that as a result of fierce fightings on Donetsk front line, the Ukrainians lost 185 soldiers and 8 armored vehicles and 2 artillery systems. Few updates we received from Siversk bridgehead, and they were very important ones. One of them we got from the Ministry of Defense and few geolocations. First of all, I would like to add that the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of artillery duels or some missile attack or something like this, they managed to destroy 2 drone control centers, and one of those drone control centers was located on the Siversk bridgehead in the vicinity of Bilogorovka. Probably the Minister of Defense were talking about this Bilogorovka that is under Russian control, and probably the Russians were talking about the 10 Mountain Assault Brigade. If you remember, during the previous months I published a lot of videos from 10th Mountain Assault Brigade, how they were bombing and shelling and hunting the Russians in this area. And you remember my reaction about those situations. I told you that this is a critical situation situation. The Russians are bombed and hunted there heavily. They have significant level of losses, and more than 2 weeks the Russians were not doing anything. Maybe they were doing something, but we haven't seen any video or photo confirmation of any of their actions. And today the Ministry of Defense reported that they destroyed drone control central in this area. So as I understand, probably the Russians managed to discover and to destroy the main forces of 10 Mountain Assault Brigade, because for the previous 2 weeks we haven't received even a single video from this brigade, from this force, about any attack against the Russian forces. So something did really happen. We don't know for sure, we don't have any evidence, any text messages or so on, but I see, according to my analysis, I see that something went wrong with that brigade, and probably the Russians managed to discover their main centers and to destroy a lot of Ukrainian forces of that brigade. So that's why it forced this brigade to reduce their activity. Maybe they just took a decision to slow down a little bit and to wait when the Russians will change their focus or something like this. Furthermore, the Russians redeployed some artillery force in this area, light mortars like Nona S. On this video we see how the Russians were operating with this type of weapon on this bridgehead, and basically the Russians were bombing and shelling the Ukrainian positions on the north of the railways. If you remember, during the previous months the Russians launched a counter-offensive operation. As a result of that attack, the Russians managed to develop their bridgehead along the railways to the north in direction of Vyimka, on the east of Vesole, this settlement, and the Russians got there. After that, the Ukrainians started bombing and shelling the Russians with counterattacks, with drone attacks and so on. Now we got report that the Ministry of Defense reported that they managed to destroy another command center of drones, and after that the Russians continued their preparation before the next step, and currently the Russians are trying to attack to the north, first of all by bombing with artillery these positions, by making some kind of artillery preparation, and as soon as the Russians finish this artillery mission, they will continue their offensive operation and they will move further to the north along these railroad ways. For the Ukrainians, this situation is not good. It's getting worse and worse, and probably is getting critical. For now, during the previous months, the Ukrainians have redeployed in this area at least 115th Mechanized Brigade and 67th Mechanized Brigade, but we don't know the real purposes of this redeployment, whether these forces were redeployed to support 10th Mountain Assault Brigade or to support the Ukrainian offensive operation in direction of Mykolaievka, Solidar, Blagodatne and Razdolovka in this direction. Very difficult to understand. And also the Russians published another video how they managed to discover and to destroy another Ukrainian artillery system on the Siversk bridgehead as a result of a Lancet strike attack. So perfect attack, perfect situation. Now we're moving further to the Liman front line. The Russians reported that as a result of fierce fightings in this area, the Ukrainians lost 70 soldiers. There are no changes on the ground. There were no changes on the ground. The regular situation. The Russians tried to dig in deeper, wait for the best momentum to attack, the best moment to attack. The Ukrainians continue moving more and more forces in this area, trying to stabilize the front line. The Ukrainians probably managed to stabilize, at least they think that they managed to stabilize the front line in the vicinity of Tarskoye, but when talking about Karamzinovka bridgehead, the situation is getting worse and worse for the Ukrainians. Today we got a very interesting video, and I would like us to see this video from the beginning till the end. This is the Ukrainian attempt to attack the Russian forces. There are a lot of very interesting details that I mentioned during watching this video. First of all, the Ukrainians were using mechanized forces. A lot of mechanized machines like personal carriers, BMP, BTR, and many other ex-Soviet types of armored vehicles, and the Ukrainians were trying using a very fast attack on the light armored vehicles to get as close as possible to the Russian positions. As you can see, there are no tanks in this attack, just very fast light vehicles. The Ukrainians even managed to reach the Russian positions in that forest. They managed to land their troopers and infantry, as you can see, and the infantry started storming operation against the Russian stronghold and fortifications in that forest. And the thing is that the Ukrainians have almost reached success, but the Russians' artillery system started working, attacking them, and after that the Ukrainians as you can see, they have almost entered the forest, but at some point, as soon as they understand that the Russians start attacking them with artillery, they took a decision to turn back and they start running away. And as you can see, as a result of that clashes, the Ukraine lost just one armored vehicle. This is very interesting information, video from many perspectives. First of all, this is geolocated video which confirms that this forest and these forest lines and Novoyegorovka still remains under Ukraine control. And this forest, this area where the main clashes took place, I'll show you on the map how the Ukrainians were moving. The Ukrainians started their movement in this area. They were moving along the forest. They're getting here, and after that they attacked these positions of the Russian forces. They started their landing operations, started entering the forest. The Russians managed to repel that attack, and after that, with artillery strike, the Ukrainians took a decision to turn back, and they evacuated also with almost without losses. Probably a few soldiers were wounded and just one armored vehicle was destroyed. So this video also confirms that the Russians have created significant, very powerful stronghold on this side of Zhiribets River, and yet we haven't received any video confirmations from the south about geolocations and from the north as well. This is probably the first video that show us the progress in this area. And now we're moving further to the Kupiansk front line. We got a lot of updates from this bridgehead, mainly from the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation. Today the Russians reported that as a result of offensive operation, they managed to develop their bridgehead, an offensive operation in the vicinity of Vilshany, Alshany, this small settlement, in the vicinity of Takarovka, this small settlement, and in the vicinity of Petropavlovka. So somewhere in this triangle, in this square, the Russians managed to develop their offensive operation and to capture more reliable positions. We don't have any video photo confirmations, but the thing that I understand that the Russians took a decision not to storm Sinkovka in front, and they took a decision to bypass the settlement from the east and to attack Petropavlovka from the northwest, from this direction, and they are trying to cut and encircle the Ukrainian forces in Sinkovka, because Sinkovka is the strongest, the most powerful stronghold in this area, and it's a suicide operation for the Russians to storm the settlement in front, and they basically want to bypass it, to encircle and to cut the Ukrainian forces and to split the Ukrainian army for many pieces. Furthermore, we got also very interesting update from this area. According to the Western deployment map, the Ukrainians have redeployed their first presidential brigade Burevi of National Guard in this area, and maybe those forces were attacking the Russians in Karmazinovka. So one more time, I'll remind you that Ukrainians have accumulated significant number of mechanized forces in this area, and for now, yet it's very difficult to understand what is the purpose of this accumulation, whether the Ukrainians are planning to attack or to defend themselves against the Russian offensive operation. The Russians reported that as a result of fierce fightings in this area, the Ukrainians lost 45 soldiers, 5 armored vehicles and 3 artillery systems. One more time, since the beginning of the Ukrainian counter-offensive operation that started on the 4th of June, the Ukrainians haven't managed to achieve anything on this bridgehead. They just lost their positions on Tarskoye salient, and they lost and allowed the Russians to build their bridgehead on the western side of Zhiribets River. And when talking about Bakhmut or Artyomovsk, the Ukrainians haven't managed to capture even a single settlement in this area. The Russians, during the first 2 months of beginning of counter-offensive operation on Solidar direction, for the first 2 months, managed to capture Solidar, Yakovlevka, Saka-Ivantseti, Nikolaevka, Blagodatnaya. Probably the Russians were in the vicinity of Paraskovivka, so many settlements were already captured by the Russians during the same period of time. The Ukrainians managed just to achieve some success in the vicinity of Vrimevka tactical bridgehead, but all these settlements are located in the lowland, and currently even the Ukrainians don't know what to do next with this progress, whether they're able to continue further, attack further to the south or not. Very difficult situation. Probably that's it about the situation on the ground, and another, probably the last few updates from Africa, from other regions. First, I believe we need to discuss the situation that we got from Iranian, let's say, part of Persian Gulf. According to the United States, Western countries, Western reports, U.S. military considers rare plan to put armored troops on civilian ships in order to stop Iranian sailors, official tell. So the thing thing is that the United States of America in the past were stopped a lot of Ukrainian ships in this area, were making some inspections because of sanctions and so on. The same things the Iranian forces start doing as well. And basically the Iranian forces start stopping the civilian ships and so on. So this thing, NATO countries wants to militarize every single ship and of course to get more money and more effort from this situation. And the final updates are coming. Let's discuss one more time the Nigeria and Niger, and we got a very interesting update that for example the leader of Nigeria required and asked permission of their parliament to start, let's call it, special military operation in Niger, and if the local parliament allows him, then probably we might see another wave of escalation in this part of the world. And probably that's it, but one more time I'll remind you that during the special military operation the Russians managed to get the 5th position in the world, the strongest economies in the world. This is a significant result of the Russian Federation. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.